Start with Rochdale, which of course is the subject of what we're discussing today. You talked about a long shadow over your town and a circumstance where the late Cyril Smith was able to escape, in your view, prosecution for what you regard as serious crimes. Why did that happen? What is your assessment as to why the CPS and the police, why were they not able to, first of all, have a proper investigation, to charge him, and to bring it to a conclusion?
Yeah, let me start by saying thank you for inviting me before the committee, Mr. Chairman. It's a privilege to be here, and I take it as a compliment to be able to come and share the knowledge and information that I have. In terms of the question, well, we know that Smith was investigated by the police from the 1950s right up to the 1990s. In the 1950s, I have it on good authority from former police officers that he owned news agents at this stage. Well before he became a Member of Parliament in '72, he was a councillor, but they were observing the newsagent shop that he owned because they'd heard reports of him in relation to young boys. But even in the 1990s, we know from speaking to former police officers, there was an Operation Cleopatra that suggested that that investigated Smith made reference to him and suggested he could be prosecuted. I understand that file was passed to the CPS and a decision was taken not to prosecute. There's still speculation about much of this. I think in the 60s when allegations were put against him in relation to Cambridge House, I think it was his force of personality, the fact that he was quite powerful locally as a councillor that helped him get away with it. He was reasonably well connected. It's understood that the local MP, Jack McCann at the time, made representations on his behalf to the then Director of Public Prosecutions, and prosecution was never pursued. If you fast forward to the time when he ended up in Parliament as an MP and the time that he spent down in London, the book suggests, and I think it's right to suggest, that he was part of a network of people that were protecting each other in terms of this type of abuse, and I think that's what allowed him to get away with the crimes that he committed. You nominated Cyril Smith for a knighthood. Now the Cabinet Office were continually blocking that. This is only a few months ago. Why the public will wonder why the Cabinet Office would want to block that information. It's now in the public domain. It was.
And why do you think that is? Why should the Cabinet Office block it?
It was David Steele that nominated Cyril Smith for the knighthood. I don't know why the Cabinet Office would not want to be open and transparent about that. It's a good number of victims through the work that I've been doing. I do believe it's important to give a voice to the voiceless, to the people that don't really get a chance to share their views and experiences. And you know, because I know that as a committee you've met some of the victims of this type of abuse, that getting a conviction, or even just getting the fact that their abuser has been identified, means a lot to them. The other point to bear in mind is that we can still bring prosecutions. So the writing of the book about Cyril Smith has led to a police investigation into Knollview Residential School in Rochdale, and there are 20, this is in the public domain, 21 suspects, 7 victims, and I met with the divisional commander for Rochdale on Friday, and he tells me that they expect arrest to be made imminently. These are people who were in a network with Smith abusing children at Knollview School. So these are alleged perpetrators that are still out there. As I said earlier, I think initially pressure was applied. And that, well, an interesting point to make actually is that they didn't prosecute him initially because the Director of Public Prosecutions felt that they were unreliable witnesses. The people he was abusing were unreliable witnesses. So these are poor white working class boys who would be unreliable. The contrast I draw is that if we fast forward to the Rochdale grooming case, the initial reason for not pushing a prosecution there was because they were white working class poor girls.
Yes.
And you do wonder what had been learnt, if anything,
well, I was
in 30, 40 years. I think he was, as years went on, I think Smith was protected. Because I do think that we have to understand why the authorities, I don't have all the answers, but we have to understand why the authorities fail to investigate such high-profile cases. I think such an inquiry would also get to the bottom of where some of the dossiers and information that's existed and that's been collected over the years, where it is and how that can be used to identify what went on at the time. And not only will that help and support victims of this abuse, but I think it will also ultimately lead to a number of other perpetrators being identified, just as has been the case in the Knoll View residential school investigation. I think that politics is the last refuge of child sex abuse deniers, you know, and it's an important point. Other institutions, the police, have dealt with this and changed the culture. The local authorities are beginning to change the way that they deal with it. The media are keen to investigate this. But in terms of politics, I think there is a continual view that we should sweep it under the carpet, that we shouldn't speak about it, that we shouldn't name people, that there shouldn't be a discussion about what's gone on in terms of child sex abuse. And there's pressure applied to people, and I think it would be better
if we open it. Pressure applied to you personally?
Well, yeah. Well, of course, there's pressure applied in terms of whether I name people or not.
I just wanted to refer to something you just said, and in fact you've said it quite a few times, that one of the reasons Mr. Smith was able to get away with what he was I think you used the word network and connection. Are you saying what the local police or local authorities were sort of working with him or complicit with him?
I think higher up the food chain, in terms of the networks that Smith belonged to, there's no doubt about it that for example, he attended Elm Guest House. We know that. The Metropolitan Police have confirmed that. I've spoke to a victim that he abused at Elm Guest House. There were other high-profile figures that it is alleged that attended Elm Guest House. An important point actually is one of my predecessors for the Littleborough part of my constituency, Geoffrey Dickens, Conservative MP, produced a dossier in the 1980s which he presented to the then Home Secretary about the paedophile information exchange, about paedophiles operating and networking within and around Westminster. Now, I think there are questions to be answered, and I think...
What year was that, Mr.
It would be the mid-1980s, so the 84, 85.
And who was the Home Secretary?
Well, the Home Secretary was Sir Leon Brittan, and I think it would be helpful if he stepped forward and shared his thoughts on where that dossier is. This is all in the public domain, but I do think it would be helpful for Sir Leon Brittan to share his knowledge of how he dealt with these allegations that were made at the time.
But what happened to the dossier?
Well, that's an interesting question, and we can't. We know that it arrived at the Home Office, but we don't know where it is since. And the inquiry that we talk about, I think, has to get to the bottom of this. And I think people like Sir Leon and others need to share their knowledge and understanding of what was going on at the time. But the point I'm making is that over the years, I think there's been politicians and the wider public, is the point I'm making, have sort of ignored this issue or tried to sweep it under the carpet, and I think that's unhealthy. And I think more transparency, more openness, shining a stronger light on this type of issue, inside or outside politics, I think is a good thing. I think we're at the early stages of working this up into something that could be substantial, that would help the victims, that would help get prosecutions, and that would clear the air in terms of what has been a tragic, terrible, horrific episode in British society. I mean, the victims of child sex abuse, and many of those who I meet, I often urge them against their will, really, to seek compensation, because I think they deserve it and often need it to receive the therapy that they should really get through the state.
Thank you. Finally, you rightly mentioned victims just now. One of the things that one finds very concerning about this is that the victims that you've talked about in this case were very often children who were in care, who should have been looked after by care, by the state and by local governments. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've seen of the effects that this has had on them throughout their lives, especially given that there were people who were placed in care in the first place and lacked the sort of stable family background or other circumstances that people take for granted?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting point. And if you take Knoll View as an example, these were children, perhaps who misbehaved and everything else. They were put in Knoll View residential school. They were abused most horrifically, absolutely terribly, by a network of paedophiles. There's no doubt about that. You know, the impact on the victims is massive. People turning to drink, drugs, many in prison. And the social impact that this has, not just on the victims as people and individuals, which is harrowing to have to listen to, even worse to have to live through as a victim, but the social impact in terms of how it affects communities. You have people who have been adversely affected, who have mental illness very often, who can't function properly, and that has a real social impact on communities, and we shouldn't forget that. You know, if you want to put a price on this stuff, you know, you can do, but it's not easy.
Mr.